What's going on, guys? What's going on? What's going on? Today was definitely one of those interesting kind of days. I think more so. But, I mean, nonetheless, though, we actually had a 3 day rally. I think that's actually been a pretty strong point for most of you. But I would hope, and I say hope, that none of you are really holding anything meaningful here overnight because this is where it gets pretty dicey to me in terms of the spot of where we close right now. And as you see, that was some wicked volatility to pretty much end the day today. That was not what you ideally wanted to see to end the day. And this is where I get dicey in terms of where we actually headed to tomorrow. All right. So that's pretty much the biggest thing. But just basically from a sentiment standpoint, what did we pretty much take away from today? Coming in from a 2 day green streak, basically. We were green on Friday. We were green yesterday. And then just a little bit of a choppy day for most part of the day today. We saw our relative strength though. We had that relative strength in the terms of Microsoft and Apple. That was pretty much green for most of the day, if not all of the day, you can say. But then what did we got? We basically got our 75 basis point rate hike, pretty much indicated off of FOMC minutes. Now, was that pretty much something that was a shocker? That was unknown? I don't think it was necessarily unknown. I think the broader market expected it because had we gotten only a 50 basis point rate hike, pretty much indicated, it likely would have said that the Feds were basically still behind the yield curve, right? Behind all of inflation, rather. So that's pretty much what I ended up getting is that the market typically got what it wanted. Hence the fact that you saw the little bit of a choppiness off of the reaction, the little bit of volatility, and we got that quick little pump. Now, getting into the chart pretty much, as you see, you have a nice little rising wedge action that was sitting there. You had the slow little bleed up that started from around 11:30 a.m. Eastern this morning. You grinded right along a nice little trendline support. Here's where you actually see the two strong wicks off of the volatility of the FOMC minutes, but you held the body of the candles actually held the trendline support, and you saw the pop and you saw the beautiful follow through. So that was pretty much the beautiful thing about that. And that's where I said you basically saw yourself wick right into that upper band of your upper resistance. You wicked above the resistance trend line, and then you ended up coming right back down to your anchored VWAP, which has been our famous anchored VWAP from our COVID lows. That's pretty much sitting at that 384.32. But what happened once we lost that anchor VWAP? We saw the flush and we wicked right under our support trend line. So that's pretty much what was going on through most of the day. I think it was pretty much uniform in which I had my resistance pretty much identified. I know Avery also dropped the chart in ideas and also in the dojo channel, in which he pretty much saw the same rising wedge. You could call it diagonal as well, but you're leading diagonal. Same thing, but as long as you pretty much identified that you had your resistance, that's where you wanted to know where to take your profits today on that quick pop if you got in on FOMC minutes. All right. Now, here's the kicker part. You see that you wicked the trendline support to the downside, but the body actually held. This is where typically where I'm going to expect to happen is that we likely end up holding our levels. As you see, we're kind of pushing a little bit after hours. I would assume that we hold this little rising wedge inside of it. We likely retest our anchored VWAP at that 384.32 tomorrow morning, in which that's likely going to end up being our resistance tomorrow morning, and then we should end up breaking down, and we should start to retrace this little 3 day green move that we've had so far. That's what I anticipate to happen. Now, here's the flip side for bulls, pretty much. If you're a bull, then you basically want to take out this wick high that we got today, in which case you're going to break over 386. And what I'm going to be targeting would be my other anchored VWAP I have at 389.24, which basically dates back towards our prior low that we had from May 20th. All right. So 389.24 would be my particular target if we can get over this 386 high that we put in today. All right. So that's the flip side, north and south. Now, getting into pretty much individual tickers, this is where you want to really consider the fact that look to see where your retracements are after this 3 day green streak. What levels in particular that you actually saw that we broke out from that pretty much triggered this entire rally that we've had since the beginning of the holiday weekend. All right. And that's particularly what you want to look at. So there are some names that kind of just stand out to me just and also I have the if and and scenario both ways, bullish, bearish, obviously, of course. But reason I'm pretty much leaning bearish is obviously you see the rising wedge. You know that's typically a bearish pattern. You're coming off a 3-day green streak. You already know that the fact that the Feds now actually have confirmed that they're giving you a 75 basis point rate hike. Now, here's the question mark, the kicker, pretty much overnight. We've known that basically your FOMC minutes, you usually get the immediate reaction. What was the immediate reaction? You got the upside. Now, what's going to be the overnight reaction here as the market digests that? Now, is the market going to consider the fact that we need to price in the 75 basis point rate hike that we're going to be getting this month? Or does the market already feel that it's already been priced in enough, in which that's your bullish case scenario, that we continue to grind higher and we break north of this rising wedge? All right. So that's pretty much just the sentiment part of where have we priced in enough now that we know what's basically coming. All right. Now getting into some individual tickers that kind of just stood out to me. Pretty much the biggest one to me was Apple. We saw the relative strength out of Apple. If I kind of get into, I probably push it out to 1 hour here. You see your well-defined little downtrend resistance. This is what I was actually eyeing this morning. We had the nice little reversal, and this was pretty much the part where I started to turn bullish on Apple. Once we started pretty much getting that downtrend that dates back down towards 30th here of June of last month, but we actually held the halfway back of this overall downtrend. We defended above the gap fill that's dating back towards June 21st. That's when I started to see the reversal start to take place. Once we were able to basically reclaim over this 137 mark, that's where I really started to lean bullish. And I started to lean bullish going up until the FOMC minutes. Now, did I expect to really come out green after the FOMC minutes? No, I did not necessarily. And that's where I actually kept runners. But this is where I particularly started to get bullish on this, is that once we ended up claiming over 137, and that's when I started to look at the fact that, all right, from 137 to testing the downtrend resistance at this 142 half, that's what it was basically my overall target. That's what I was looking for. And everything that we got after the downtrend break was pretty much just a gift. So that's what I was looking at. If we do get continuation, and this is the bullish case scenario, we get the upside continuation, which we see the relative strength out of Apple, then I am going to be targeting up towards 147. Otherwise, if we can't hold, and this is where if I zoom in, you see your nice little trend line support that's sitting here. If we break under 141, this is where the bearish scenario comes into play, and you see the highlighted gap fill down below under this 133.32 spot that I'm going to be looking at. So that's the if and scenario. I think the downside obviously is a lot greater. If the market rolls over, I would not be surprised if Apple actually leads the downfall, in which this is going to go straight down towards that gap fill pretty quickly, just as quickly as it accelerated and has shown strength the past 3 days. I think it's also going to be capable of also leading the downfall as well. So that's something to keep in mind. But that's where I have the trend line support. We'll see how it reacts at that 141 trend line support tomorrow, and then we'll be able to play it if or and if it holds 141, then we know that we could potentially look to target that 147 for further upside. Or if we break below 141, then we can start to target the gap fill here at this 133 half, basically. All right. Randy, what's going on? A little bit of everything IBM. I will take a look at that for you right now, real quick. But that's pretty much one that just stood out in terms of looking overall what actually had strength and what may end up playing for both directions of what's to come in the market tomorrow and for the rest of the week. I think Apple's definitely one that's going to give you more direction as it already has here through that rally that we basically had. All right. Tesla was one I was going to get into just a quick second. I know that was a choppy one today. A little bit of everything. Let me actually take a look at IBM. And why do I feel like I think someone actually had me look at this? Was it yesterday or probably the day before? I feel like someone had me look at it though. Just kind of feeling like deja vu. But I think it actually looked a lot better off of the weekly. I think the weekly downtrend break is still very much intact right now. So nothing says that we're gonna typically kind of break down here. Could you get a little bit more of a downfall? I think you can get a little bit more of a little more of a pullback to say, if I want to say for a better term. But your overall downtrend break on the weekly here still looks beautiful. Now, if I pretty much erase that downtrend break and I get into a smaller time frame, this is where I kind of say that you likely end up seeing a little bit of a pullback because it does look like a little bit of a rising wedge type of action going on. You have your nice little trend line support here, and this is where I see your upper trend line resistance kind of sitting here. So this is where I would say that I would be a little bit careful with this one right here, As you kind of see that you're getting close enough to that trend line support. Let's see if you end up breaking that. But I would look to see if you end up particularly holding this 131. I think if you end up breaking down 131 would be where you particularly look to see if you find buyers yet again. As you've seen, that's basically been a level of consolidation that you've had, a level of support, rather, I should say, that you've had the past few weeks. You basically got a nice gap up over that 131 level. You've held that for most part of the end, the third week of April, up until you gap down on in October of last year. So that 131 spot should end up acting as your support. So if we get a breakdown in the broader market, I would expect this little rising wedge type action on IBM to break down, and it should end up pulling back down to 131, which I would expect buyers to step in there. All right. But that's pretty much your bear scenario. Otherwise, if you are bullish on this one in particular, then you're basically looking to reclaim over 140 half. You reclaim over 140 half, and then you could test the resistance yet again up towards 145 half. All right. But that's your if and scenario there. The one, like I said, I was gonna get into real quick was Tesla. I know that Tesla has just been a little bit more choppy than we've been particularly accustomed to seeing this, but you are getting very close enough to this little end of this wedge that you've been sitting in. You basically see well-defined up your resistance, well-defined support that pretty much makes up this little wedge action. I was watching for the upside here today off of the back end of FOMC. It wasn't particularly as strong as I was anticipating it would be. Given the fact that it was red for most of the day, you had a phenomenal recovery. I was expecting a little bit more juice out of it on the back end of FOMC minutes. We did not particularly see that. I still have my resistance sitting at the 709, 710 spot. If for whatever reason we have a gap up, maybe we get some relative news on Tesla that maybe gives it a nice little pop. That's still my overhead resistance that I'm looking at. It's a 709, 710 spot. But if you do end up breaking over 710, I'm looking at the downtrend resistance that's sitting at 729. Otherwise, you're looking for your breakdown here. Your breakdown particularly is going to be under the 685 spot. And then we can start to talk about the support level at 655. And then if you break down, you're looking at testing June 16th lows at 626. All right. So it is getting very close into the end of this wedge. You also do have earnings coming up. I'm interested to see the fact of whether we continue to stay in this little wedge that we have until the earnings come out, because that's really where I'm a little bit more skeptical, which I want to force a position to go into Tesla or I don't, because I have a little bit more of a feeling in the fact that some other names, if volatility kicks into the market and we get some downside, then maybe some other names might end up taking the punishment to the downside in terms of the tech sector rather than Tesla. And for all we know, that maybe we end up staying within this wedge until earnings gives us that deciding factor of downside or upside. That's a little bit more the factor where I'm a little bit more skeptic and trying to push a situation to happen on Tesla. So, kind of just giving you that heads up. Don't try to go too crazy and press too hard into Tesla, because it may end up possibly even staying in this wedge until we get our earnings that are due on the 20th, it's saying here. So, that's just something to keep in mind. You're about 14 days away from the 28th. That's something that you want to keep in mind rather than trying to force a situation, especially a weekly expiration here, when you only have 2 days of the week left, and then you're going to be looking at on Friday, like, what should I do? All right. So that's something I kind of felt like I should have pointed out. Other than that, I don't think there was anything else that kind of stood out too much. I think the video was maybe one that you can point to as well in terms of this little overall uptrend that we've had on Tesla. It's been pretty nice as well. I think semis have actually done fairly well for the most part. But you have a nice little trendline support, also pretty much part of this nice little rally that we've had, but you also had a nice breakdown off of this trendline support. So I'm going to look to see if we get continuation on the downside here, targeting where we saw buyers pretty much accumulate previously, whether they're trapped still or not, in terms of shorts. But you had a nice little attempt at a breakout here up towards this 146 half. You failed it. You had a strong gap down. You attempted another breakout. You had a fake out, attempted a breakout yet again, and you retested this 146 to 146 half yet again. So that would be potentially my target to the downside here. If we get a rollover 146, 146 half, that would be my target to the downside here after breaking your trendline support today. So that's one you can also target to the downside as well. as semis have already had such a beautiful rally. But I'll be looking at that one for the downside tomorrow. But other than that, I think the biggest thing is then let's see if we can potentially see another leg higher on this little rising wedge action we have on SPY. For most of you that pretty much saw a little rising wedge action, let's see if we can pretty much continue to stay in this little rising wedge action, get another leg higher, and who knows if we pop yet again north of the rising wedge, or if we end up getting a breakdown as it's pretty much anticipated now after that end of day volatility and the closing in of this rising wedge that is typically a bearish pattern. All right. So other than that, though, hopefully that kind of just gave you guys a little gist of today's price action. I'm kind of in the mindset that it's not going to be particularly beautiful towards the end of this week. We had a strong 3 day rally. I think that's most of what the market's likely going to end up giving us, if I want to be honest with you guys. And I think we're likely going to pretty much finish the week on a sour note to red, just flushing down, in which the market is basically going to say that we have not priced in enough leading into the 75 basis point rate hike that we have within the next week or two here. All right. So that's pretty much just what my estimate is, my sentiment is going into tomorrow. So I pretty much chose to stay cash. Let's see what the market wants to give us tomorrow, and then we'll pretty much go from there. All right. But other than that, I appreciate you guys joining in as always. Hopefully, I was able to give you guys a little bit of a guidance, a little bit of a broader perspective in terms of the market here, and I was able to give you a little bit of insight on maybe some things to keep on the watch list. I think Nvidia, Tesla, and Apple are definitely on the watch list, but I would caution against Tesla here. I think that's probably what I wanted to kind of mention. I know it's usually a focal point for all of us to pretty much just directly look at Tesla, but don't try to be too quick to force a situation there. All right. But other than that, I'll leave it at that. I think we'll call it a day for the evening here. But other than that, I will see you guys on live tomorrow morning. Again, appreciate you guys for joining in. But you guys have a good evening.